Welcome to Sports Econ 101, the show where we discuss sports topics from a business perspective. I'm your host, Edward Brown, along with my co-host, Vern Glenn, and welcoming back our previous co-host from years gone by, Bruce MacGowan. At each commercial break, we are going to ask a sports trivia question. We're not sure if Russell's going to join us. If he does, that'd be great. Otherwise, it'll be the Three Musketeers as we had before. Today's trivia theme. What's today's trivia theme? You know what? I'll have to tell you in the next segment. Somehow I don't have it on here. But some things that we're going to want to cover in the next segment, the death of John Madden and Dan Reeves. You know, they didn't seem to give as much notice about Dan Reeves as they did John Madden. You notice that?
Well, that's not a surprise. I mean, Dan Reeves was a great guy.
Well, it's no surprise. I mean, yeah. John Madden is, Dan Reeves for a terrific player for the Dallas Cowboys, a running back, and then he took two teams to the Super Bowl, 9 trips total as player and coach to the Super Bowl. But Edward, when you're just talking about magnitude and impact on the game, nothing touches John Madden. I mean, come on.
That's true. No, that's true. I mean, but it just seemed like they just sort of kind of glossed over that. And then we
who was they, Edward? Who was they?
You know what? I didn't see it in the stands or anything. I just kind of like saw it on a little notification. You know, oh, by the way, Dan had passed on. That's all.
Yeah. What Vernon was just saying was right on. I mean, Dan Reeves was a fine player, terrific coach, but his teams that he coached never won a Super Bowl. And as Vernon was mentioning, I mean, John Madden, in addition to being an icon in the media and this, video game icon, people forget that this guy was a legendary figure as a coach. I mean, the Raiders in the 70s, those teams were born under Madden. They had some good teams before.
Plus being in the booth too. Hey guys, stay with us. We're going to be right back. Don't touch that dial. Sports Econ 101 will be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, along with Vern Glenn. Our special guest, Bruce MacGowan, and Russell Jackman has joined us. So we were just talking about John Madden being quite an icon. Also, he was in the booth too, right? So it's not just the Madden football game, the video game, but how many years was he a broadcaster?
Well, he
about 24, I think.
He went right into it right after finishing coaching in 1979, and he'd been the Raider head coach for 10 years. Before that, he was an assistant coach. He was the youngest coach at the time in the league at age 32 when Al Davis gave him that opportunity. And the Raiders never really had a bad season from a 1-loss total. They just could not get by the Pittsburgh Steelers in those battles in the 70s. But he finally
or the Miami Dolphins,
or the Miami Dolphins,
or the Chiefs, or even the Broncos. They did win one.
That was the big one.
Win one conference final. That was it.
For years, it was the Chiefs. Then it moved over to Pittsburgh.
Well, the Chiefs beat them one time in the final AFL game, and then of course it was Miami a couple years, Pittsburgh a couple years, and then they finally broke the spell in '76 and won it. And then the Broncos beat him in '77, and that was the end of that great era. But guys, I was lucky enough to cover, go to a lot of those games as a fan. But then in '75, when I started my career, I got to cover the Raiders pretty closely and got to know a lot of their players. George Atkinson and Fred Biletnikoff remain friends to this day. John Madden was one of the best guys you could ask a young reporter to engage with because he was honest to a fault, straightforward, informal, not one of these button-down, uptight, cliche spouting kind of coaches. And he was a lot of fun to just sit down with. In those days, we didn't have guys coming to a podium and standing up in front of a group of reporters and answering questions. The coach would come in, and Madden would sit down in a chair in the coach's office, which was a pretty large area because he had 5 or 6 other coaches at the time, assistants. And he would just talk to the writers and a few electronic media very, very casually. And, you got to know him that way. It was a different era, though. This is back in the 1970s. There were a lot more newspaper men in those days. There certainly were a lot more radio and TV guys. but there was no internet, and there wasn't going to be any internet for another quarter of a century. So it was a different world. But Madden was wonderful, guys. He was.
How did
Madden was essentially everybody's crazy uncle that loved football. I mean, that's how I think everyone.
Yeah.
You know, he had such a disarming way about him, and he never, used statistics.
Yeah. He was no different, Russell, than in front of the camera than he was as a coach. Maybe a little more animated, a little more, showy. But John Madden, I remember once asking him a question after they got one of their rare losses. They got beaten by the Broncos during the year that they lost in '77. They got hammered by them at Oakland, something like 30-7. They turned the ball over 4 or 5 times. Kenny Stabler got sacked about 5 times. And I'm a young reporter, with my TV crew in there working for a little radio TV station out in the boonies. And I asked him, I said, John, what happened to you guys today? Were you guys not emotionally ready to play this game? And he looks at me and he kind of smiles and he goes, no, we were emotionally ready. It's not any of those things that you guys would like to conjure up. We just gave him the ball 6 times. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So, very straightforward. No BS. I loved it.
And then right after coaching, he went right into the broadcast booth. They paired him up with Pat Summerall, and
what a great team. Yeah.
And the rest is history. He just changed broadcasting from that standpoint.
When did
he really did.
When did he become when did he become afraid of flying? When did he start doing the bus deal? Where he didn't like to fly, and so he just traveled in the bus. Was that always the case from the start of his coaching?
Pretty much.
I believe it, but it came from a ill-fated flight that he took with the team, and he was just so petrified that he vowed never to fly on a plane again. And so he would meet the team in opposing cities. In fact, Bruce, I bet you can attest to that.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
the Madden Cruiser was an iconic thing. The Madden Cruiser.
Yeah, but hold on, Bruce.
I was going to say he did fly with the team all the way until he finished coaching. The problem wasn't that he was afraid of flying, even though in college almost his entire team at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo was wiped out in a plane crash. He happened not to be on that plane. You'd think he would be afraid of flying. It was not a fear of flying. It was a fear of claustrophobia. He did not like being in an enclosed space. And I remember getting to travel with the team several times, and he would constantly be pacing up and down the jetway, talking to people. I always thought he was just being real gregarious. Turns out he was not happy. But to answer your question, the Madden Cruiser thing started, a couple of years after he got into it, because he just did not feel comfortable. And it was interesting, guys. I think you read about this. Maybe you didn't. One of the things he loved about it was that he got a chance to really meet a lot of people in Middle America, the fans, off the beaten path, the small towns. He got to engage them. He even took a few of them on the bus and drove them around. I mean, that's the way Madden was. He was a man of the people.
And he was quite the businessman. I understand that in 1985, he bought an apartment at the famous Dakota apartment building in New York City, bought it from Gilda Radner, then a not ready for primetime player with Saturday Night Live, bought it for $600,000, sold it in 2012 for $3.9 million.
Geez, only you would remember that
math
kind of
to
stuff.
see what kind of rate of return that is. But in fact, I'm going to do it. Okay, so wait a minute, hold on. I'll do that at the next segment. He bought it for $600,000 in 1985, and he sold it in 2012. You said?
Yes, for 3.9.
Okay.
There you go. Now, hey Edward, now you're into the business of sports.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll have to figure out that rate of return in just a minute here. But also, and then just covering before we have to go to another break here. We lost Sam Jones too.
Oh yeah,
the Celtics.
Number 24. Yep.
Yeah,
and Dan Reeves.
I know.
Russ. Before you jumped on Russ, we talked about Coach Reeves.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay, but Sam.
Guys already.
Does that mean? Well, wait. No, Bob Cousy's still around, isn't he? And so is Bill Russell. Bill Russell's still around.
Bill Russell is still around. I'm not sure if Bob Cousy is around or not. I seem to remember he passed, but if he is around, he's got to be close to 90. He was the Jerry West of his time, and Jerry West, of course, played at the same time, but Jerry wasn't quite as developed Bob Cousy. He was kind of like Meadowlark Lemon or any of those great players in the Harlem Globetrotters who should have played in the NBA but weren't allowed to. Great ball handler and amazing passer. And it's really a shame. I think the NBA was wonderful back in those years, but there weren't a lot of black players that weren't allowed to play, maybe 2 or 3 per game or per team. And it was most unfortunate. Bill Russell was so much better than everybody else that they had to let him play. But I don't think the NBA really became a true league until probably the 1970s and even the 1980s when, integration finally allowed, African-American people to have equal opportunities. And even to this day, it's kind of hard to believe that, but there you go.
If you ever get a chance to see the movie The Pistol, it's about when Pete Maravich was younger, and Press Maravich, his dad. And toward the very end of the movie, it's not really a spoiler alert, but it was Press Maravich who, again, I'm assuming this story's true, right? He's the one who kind of went to the other side of town and said, you know what, these black players can play. And then they actually had a scrimmage, and Pete's team lost just barely at the buzzer by this group. And so, was this when Pete was at LSU, or are you talking about the pros? This is when he was in I think he was in 8th grade, but he was playing for a high school team. That's how good he was. Okay. All right. Yeah. So we are going to cut to our, you know what? Gosh darn it. I forgot to get my trivia questions. Can you believe that? How about that? I know. It's so funny. I got so used to putting all this other stuff down. I totally forgot about our trivia questions. So we got about, but hold on here. Did I remember my thoughts? I do have thoughts for the day at the end.
Oh, well, you can't wait for that. Yeah. By the end of the show.
But yeah, you got to wait for the end of the show on that one. But all right, guys. So we are going to cut to our next commercial break. When we come back, obviously we've got to talk a little bit about Antonio Brown, and then also look what happened to the quarterback from Ole Miss. All right, stay with us. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Edward Brown, Vern Glenn, Russell Jackman, and our special guest Bruce MacGowan, who was a co-host for a long time from the beginning, actually, of our show.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Beatles reunion a little bit.
How about that?
All right, so
not quite, Vernon, but we'll take that as a compliment.
The Beatles had nothing on the Beatles had nothing on us. I know.
I'm afraid I'm the Ringo Starr of the group.
There you go. You're the Ringo Starr, and Edward is the John Lennon, and Vernon is the Paul McCartney, and I'm George Harrison.
There you go. Okay, the quiet.
All right.
All right. Obviously, we got to talk about Antonio Brown. Do we
really?
Boy.
With Tom Brady, it seemed like it happened right after the conversation with Tom Brady.
That was serious. That was embarrassing, and it was almost surreal to see a guy rip his uniform off and walk off the field with no uniform top or even a shirt. It's just, but it's, in keeping. This guy is a tortured soul. If you've ever read about Antonio Brown, he had a horrific childhood. His mom wasn't around. His dad apparently couldn't take care of him because he was working all the time. So he was couch surfing. Can you imagine being a 7 or 8 or 10-year-old kid having to stay with different relatives and friends on couches every other night? No wonder the guy is so messed up,
Yeah, and
anyway, I'm not making excuses, but
yeah, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really speculate whether it's bipolar or whatever. But there was, you know what? I credit Mike Tomlin for putting up with him for 9 years in Pittsburgh, and because ever since he left that program, he's just been all over the place. And I just, I happen to be doing a show on that day with Lorenzo Neal, who played in the NFL for 16 seasons. And I asked Lo, I said, boy, you ever have a teammate that would just quit in the middle of a game? He goes, no, not in the middle of a game. Although he's seen guys, shut it down in training camp or something like that. Or, they just walk up and go, hey, look, I'm done. But in a game, that was parody.
That's nuts.
And we still don't know why. We still don't know why. It's been almost 3 days, and we still don't know why he did that. Which makes
he's mental. Russell, he's got a serious mental problem, and we don't know exactly the nature of which, as Vernon was mentioning. He's not a doctor. None of us are. But I remember, Vernon, you remember this when he showed up at Raider camp a couple of years ago, and he showed up late. and he showed up I guess he showed up with a helicopter or something.
No, it was a hot air balloon.
There you go. That's even.
It was a hot air balloon, and this happened to be the year that Hard Knocks was filming in Napa at the Raiders. So Hard Knocks thought it would be a great idea to film the arrival of Antonio Brown in a hot air balloon.
Yeah, it was.
Nuts.
Yeah,
nuts.
You guys remember when the Raiders played Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl, and one of their star, I think it was an offensive lineman.
The center, yeah.
The center, yeah.
You're talking about
Barrett Robbins.
Yeah, exactly. And he just.
Yeah, he's the center.
Yeah, he just sort of just boom, like a no-show.
Well, he was bipolar, and he was off his medication. Yeah,
he's actually doing okay. Apparently, he's doing all right now. But the night before the game, he went down, I think, to Tijuana and got pretty drunk. And he showed up, and Bill Callahan had to suspend him. And John Gruden knew the playbook because he had coached the Raiders the previous year. So here he is coaching Tampa. Now the Raiders' offensive line, which had been one of their strengths, is decimated by the loss of an All-Pro. The Raiders had no chance to win that game, and they didn't come close.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it'd be interesting to see, how this all unfolds. To find out that there's some like bipolar, some kind of real medical situation rather than just
no question.
Do you guys think that he'll get another chance? I mean, we see teams always willing to give him another chance.
So. I think this was I think this was the final.
If they wouldn't let Colin Kaepernick in because of what he could potentially do in the in a locker room disruption, Antonio Brown is that times 3.
I don't think
talent always seems to win out.
And I feel bad.
I don't think Colin Kaepernick was a distraction. I really don't think Colin Kaepernick was a distraction to his teammates. He was a distraction to the fans and the media who didn't like what he had to say, because what he had to say, there was some validity to it. And I understand.
I was thinking that, well, or maybe, I was going to say that, or Tim Tebow, just anybody who is out of the norm. A lot of times it sounds like the teams don't want to have any kind of disruption potential.
Yeah, you can understand that.
Yeah,
well,
you can understand it.
I don't know about disruption with Tim Tebow. I mean, all he did was win.
Yeah.
but it was the way that he won with the Broncos that was just so different than what everybody was used to, even John Elway. But there was nothing Elway could do at the time because the Broncos kept winning with him.
Yeah. No, that's true. So,
well, I didn't win enough, that's for sure.
Yeah, true.
Otherwise, he'd still be there.
That's why Antonio,
you're right.
I mean, it seems like there's.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be scared. As talented as he is, I'd be kind of scared that they're not only who knows this loose cannon what he's going to do, but what if he decides in the middle of a game to just quit?
Yeah. Well, that's rare.
Like anything else, this will come out. So somehow, some way, this will come out, and we'll get to the bottom of it. And like Tom Brady said on his Instagram and after the game, he said, "Well, I just hope he gets, I hope he gets the help that he needs." And it's just sad that he's no longer a teammate of mine. So
we see in instances with like Alden Smith.
Go ahead,
Russell.
Yeah, well, we see in a lot of cases with guys like Alden Smith and Le'Veon Bell, and of course Antonio Brown himself, the teams are willing to make that exception because they see the high level of talent that these guys have. That's a little bit of the difference between Colin Kaepernick and Tim Tebow, is that those guys were not putting up great numbers when they got cut. Whereas, Antonio Brown, I think a lot of teams still think he's a primary lead wide receiver. Alden Smith got 5 different chances on other football teams before they finally pulled the string on him. Reuben Foster for the 49ers got picked up by the Washington football team when he got cut. So there's a lot of times where teams are willing to make an exception just because they think they'll get a lot of talent for really cheap.
Oh, yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, Alden Smith, same thing with the great pass rusher of the 49ers. He had several off-the-field incidents, and then the Raiders gave him an opportunity, and more of these occurred. And now I understand a couple of weeks ago he had another run-in with the police. His career is finished, and it's a shame because he was maybe one of the best pass rushers. He was one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, no question.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. When he was right, he was an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
All right, guys, moving on to the bowl game where Ole Miss quarterback, he got hurt. Didn't he get hurt like close to the beginning?
I did not watch that game, so I can't comment on it. But tell me exactly what happened.
Okay, so it looked like he basically, it looked like a knee injury, and he actually went back to the locker room and he came back on crutches. And I was watching Sports Center, and Scott Van Pelt made an interesting point. You know how we talked before about certain players are deciding, hey, I don't want to play in a bowl game because I might get hurt. Well, Scott brought up the point. He goes, well, what if a guy like that had said, you know what, I don't even want to play the last two or three games. I'm just before the bowl game. I'm healthy today. I don't know what's going to happen during the rest of the games, and I pretty much set my tone that I'll be taken in the first or second round.
Well, Nick Bosa can tell you all about that. He elected not to play for Ohio State anymore because he wanted to get ready for the draft.
Now, did he do it before a bowl game, or did he do it like partway through the season?
He did. He did it. He did it. I want to say close to midway of the season. He said, "Hey guys, hey, that's it. I'm done."
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and he'd had a history of some injury problems too. You have to understand these guys. Their payday window sometimes is pretty narrow, especially in the NFL where injuries crop up and can occur so quickly. So, I understand why Nick Bosa did what he did. There's no question. It was tough on the Ohio State program, but it worked out well for him.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hey, Bruce, before you go, because I know you have to go pretty soon, you got a book coming out.
Well,
I'm in the process. Yeah, I've actually, during the shutdown, the COVID shutdown of 2020, when there were 2 months, I guess, right at the beginning where we just had to shelter in place, I just spent 5 to 7 hours a day in front of the computer writing all these little chapters of my recollections of working in broadcasting for so many years. And it wasn't so much about broadcasting, it was about the teams and the players and the individuals I was lucky enough to cover on a regular basis. And there's some great stories there. I did include some chapters about some times I spent in small market radio and TV, which I think a lot of people don't realize is it's not gone, but it's really pretty much decimated by deregulation, which unfortunately ruined our industry. And I'm glad I got my years in. Yeah, well, there's so many companies, not to get into a great detail about this, but there's so many companies now that have disappeared, and all these monster companies now own, most of the radio and TV stations, and they've downsized their announcers. In the small markets, there are just not that many opportunities. So I worked in Eureka, in Auburn, California, before I got my big chance in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, and then worked in New York. But all those experiences, they're some fun stories. I don't think you have to necessarily be a sports fan to enjoy these stories. I haven't even written a title yet, and I haven't gotten a publisher, but I'm in the process of editing. It takes about 2 years to really put a good book together.
Hey, Bruce, stay with us. I know you got just a few minutes. We're going to cut to a break.
I got to
right back with you.
Yeah.
Stay with us. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Edward Brown, Vern Glenn, Russell Jackman, and our special guest, Bruce MacGowan. So, Bruce, continue on with the book that you're talking about, that you're writing.
Yeah, it's just, as I said before, in case, you just joined in, it's just a series of recollections and stories. I wrote one about John Madden, about Willie Mays, one about Kirk Gibson, of all people, who was really quite a character. I got to know him, unfortunately, in a negative way. He was in the clubhouse once, and I didn't even know who he was. This was early in his career, and I'm interviewing a fellow by the name of Chet Lemon.
Oh, yeah.
And Kirk Gibson started screaming at me, and I didn't know who he was. He was just a young player, a rookie, and from that point on, every time he saw me, I got the red ass from him, even when he was a manager. And the ironic thing was, years later, I'm down in Atlanta with the San Francisco Giants in a playoff series, and I get a call on my cell phone, and it's a producer in Detroit where Kirk had played, and he said, I want you to be on this radio show as a guest talking about the playoff game with the Giants and Braves. And I said, okay, that's fine. Who's your host? He goes, Kirk Gibson.
Oh, man.
So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
What was that like then?
Well, he was a rough character. He was very intelligent. He was very, very passionate. He had a football player's mentality, but he was obviously a little on the edge, and he did not like radio guys. He might have had an experience. Yeah, he had an experience that was probably negative with a radio reporter, and when he saw me sticking the mic in his face, that was it. He didn't like me, and he never was going to like me. You know, stories like that. That was a negative one. On the positive side, I got to know Willie Mays very well. A quick story on Willie. I worked at an all-sports station in San Francisco for many years, and Willie always used to be very kind. I'd run into him in the Giants clubhouse. He used to hang out with some of the players. And when I got cut loose by this station, I ended up working across town for another station. And Willie says to me, he goes, "How come I don't hear you on the," he's got this high-pitched voice, he goes, "How come I don't hear you on the sports station anymore?" And I said, "Well, that's because I'm working for the all news station now." Well, he goes, "What's that?" I said, "Well, it's another station. It's the #1 station in town." He goes, "I never heard of him. You're not on the sports station. Why'd they get rid of you?" And I said, "Well, these things happen. The company changed hands. I lost my job. They downsized it." He goes, "That's wrong. That shouldn't be happening." I said, "Well, Willie, you were in baseball. You got traded to the Mets." And he started laughing. He said, "Yeah, it happened to me too." So,
it kind of reminds
like
me.
That.
When he's got that kind of just like an all sports mentality, it reminds me. Rogers Hornsby used to say, he goes, "Yeah, all during winter, I would just sit out there and look at the snow, waiting for spring training to start."
Yeah.
Like,
Willie was fun.
All about baseball.
Willie was a lot of fun. And I mentioned John Madden earlier. I mentioned Fred Biletnikoff and George Atkinson and people like that, Al Attles and Rick Barry. More lately, I'm sure Vernon feels the same way about this. You can't really get to know the players intimately on a one-on-one basis, but luckily with the Warriors, we've got one of the most likable groups of guys. Whether it's Klay Thompson or Steph Curry or Steve Kerr or Draymond Green. And the 49ers have a few guys like that too here in the Bay Area. So we're lucky. And that's the thing I think people will enjoy if they ever do pick up this book. And I don't know if anybody outside the Bay Area would be that interested, because it's mostly about our Bay Area athletes, but it's the personalities and the connection you make with these people. It's not so much the games. And Vernon knows this because he's been doing this, for many, many years in television. The fun and the enjoyment that you have from working as a sports announcer is more dealing with the players and getting to know them as people and understanding their mentality. And that to me is what makes, hopefully this makes this book, semi-interesting to the non-sports fan even. So we'll see.
Well, Bruce, I probably like you. I mean, you spend a lot of time around these guys. You get to know them a little bit, and then you see them as actual real human beings with real lives and real domestic. I mean, but they are elite athletes, and so they automatically just get put on this pedestal. But they are human beings. Hey, I'm curious about this book, Bruce. Are you gonna take like 10 guys and have like 10 chapters, 1 chapter per guy, and just kind of do it that way? What's the thinking?
Well, I've done about 36 chapters altogether. Some of them are about teams, some of them are about games, some of them are about different, radio and TV stations and the weird kind of silly things that go on behind the scenes that people wouldn't have any idea about but would find amusing. Small market radio and television is different. It's very informal. It's kind of like the minor leagues of broadcasting. But before I do go, I got to tell you one more quick story. I don't know if our listeners know about George Blanda. George Blanda retired way back in 1975. He played until he was 48 years old. He was a place kicker, but before that, a very good quarterback with the Oakland Raiders and the Houston Oilers. They were then called the Oilers before they moved to Tennessee. And before that, the Chicago Bears, where George Halas was the coach. Anyway, George was from Kentucky, kind of a crotchety old guy. He won notoriety in 1970 with a number of great come-from-behind wins with kicks that won games, field goals and touchdowns. He was 43 at the time that happened. So when I'm a young reporter in 1975 working for this little radio station, I go in the Raider locker room after the game. He's sitting there all alone. Nobody's talking to him. This was his last year. And I was kind of in awe, and I go over to him, and he's taking his uniform off and looking at the floor and not paying any attention. I said, "Excuse me, George." I was always very informal. He goes, "What the beep do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'd just like to do a quick interview." He goes, "What the beep for?" And I said, "Well, it's for a station in Auburn. Where the beep is Auburn? And I said, it's a little town off of the I-80 on the way to Lake Tahoe. And he goes, what do I want to beep talk to you for, kid? And then he kind of softened, and he did this interview, and I don't remember anything about the interview. It was one of those innocuous kind of cliche-ridden interviews, but George had some fun stories. And at the end of the interview, I said, George, would you mind doing me a favor? And he goes, what the beep do you want now, kid? You're driving me crazy. And I said, here's a little, I had written on a piece of paper. I had typewritten it, and then I'd scratched out certain words so he could, so it sounded okay. I said, this is a little endorsement for this radio show I do. It says, I'm George Blanda. When I'm driving through Auburn, I listen to Bruce McGowan on the K-High, K-Fi Sports Report at 545. He goes, what the heck? He didn't say heck. He takes it from me, rips it out of my hand. Give me that microphone. Does a perfect take. And he goes, no, I didn't like that. He does another one. And then he throws the microphone back at me after doing a perfect take of this little endorsement. And he says, now get the bleep out of here. You're driving me nuts, kid.
That's a good one, man.
You forgot to mention when you were talking about the Warriors, about the soft-spoken, non-opinionated Rick Barry.
Oh, yeah. Well, Rick and I worked together, and that's another story for another time. But 25 years later, after my little encounter with George Blanda as a rookie reporter, I'm in the Raider locker room because I was doing sidelines on their broadcasts in Oakland. This would be 2000. And there's George Blanda sitting across the room with some of the players. The Raiders used to bring along some of their alumni. And by this time, he's a 78-year-old man with gray hair. He's got white hair, and he's real gregarious. And I go up to him and introduce myself. And I said, you probably don't remember me, but I bugged you for an interview, and you were nice enough to do it. And he kind of laughed. He said, yeah, I think I have a recollection of you. He says, you drove me up the wall, kid. And then he looks at me and goes, but everything turned out okay for you, didn't it? So, stories like that. I think those kind of personal.
You're going to have to go on a book signing tour.
Well, to be honest with you, this is a labor of love. I don't expect to really make any money off this thing or get any notoriety. It was more of a labor of love.
I want to buy a copy. Yeah. I'm already enthralled.
Bruce, is it a working title?
Well, I haven't figured one out yet. Without being too egotistical, I think the only way to really get some attention for it is to throw my name in there, because in the Bay Area, I still have a pretty good reputation, but I'm not sure exactly how I do it. So if you guys
in George Blanda fashion, how about what do you want now, Bruce?
Hey, I like that. I'll think of that, Vernon.
Get out of here, kid! You bother me.
Get away, kid! You bother me. Hey, listen, guys. I had that happen more than a few times over the years. I'm sure Vern did too. But Vern's such a likable guy. It's hard for people to get mad at him. But I was very persistent. I never took no for an answer. But I was, I never also put a player on the spot and asked him a leading question or asked him a question that made him feel uncomfortable. 95% of the time, I didn't do that. And as a result, I was able to.
People would remember you because aren't you like 6'5"?
Yeah, and I always had that long arms to get over the crowd when there was a group of people, clustering around an athlete. There's a shot of Vernon and me and a bunch of other people trying to talk to Steph Curry, and I'm the guy in the back, and I'm reaching over everybody with my long arm, getting my mic in there.
Now, did anyone ever ask you, say, since you're 6'5", did they go, well, wait a minute, what team do you play for?
No. I wasn't even a good high school athlete, so there was no question. Plus, I was older than most of the guys, so no, nothing like that. That would have been flattering, but no chance.
Well, hey, thanks again for coming on and being a guest in any time, okay?
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. You continue to have a great time, and it was a lot of fun catching up with you and Vernon Russell. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce. Hey, and Happy New Year to you and your lovely family.
Hey, thank you. You too, Vernon. The rest of you guys. Enjoy 2022. We all need to stay safe and positive.
Yep. Amen.
So, starting off okay. Thanks, Bruce. All right, guys. So
you got it.
Now it's just down to the three of us. But I don't
like the old days.
Like the old days, yeah. I can't remember when there's been this many teams in football involved, like really important games in the last couple.
That's what the added week and the additional wild card will do for you.
Yeah, there's so many situations. I was watching SportsCenter last night, and Scott Van Pelt came up with it. There were like 37 different scenarios, and that's just for the AFC alone. So this is going to be some humdinger of a final weekend. And since we're in the Bay Area for the 49ers, they're still fighting for a spot. And it comes down to this game with the Rams coming up on the weekend. And it looks like there's just one spot left because the Eagles, for whatever reason, the Eagles have clinched a spot, and the Eagles were behind the 49ers. So it's crazy the way these equations and scenarios work out. But the bottom line is, for the 49ers, they have to beat the Rams, and that is no easy task.
Well, yeah, wasn't it? I think if Washington would have beaten Philadelphia, then the Niners would have automatically gone in.
If the Saints had lost, then the 49ers would have gotten in.
Yeah, but I mean,
now, Vern, I have a good question for you. If Garoppolo's thumb is healthy, do you think he starts over Trey Lance after Trey Lance had that big win?
Kyle Shanahan was asked that direct question, and he said, "Hey, if Garoppolo were able to come back and fully function in practice at 100% with no blowback, then he would go with Garoppolo."
But hopefully he would allow for a quick change if Garoppolo doesn't seem to be having it, or throwing.
I mean, bottom line is, I mean, whoever's back there, the bottom line is that he has to do everything he can to win this game. I mean, forget, Jimmy does this and Trey does this, whatever. I mean, he's got to worry about the secondary. He's got two guys with COVID. Your starting corners, they're out with COVID this week, and they're hoping to be cleared by Saturday so they can play on Sunday. If not, you're down to one guy off the practice squad and another rookie playing that spot. And if I'm Matthew Stafford, I'm like, hey, okay, great, I'll take advantage of that. So there's that scenario that has nothing to do with Lance or Garoppolo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm a little concerned about our secondary. All right, guys, stay with us. Audience, stay with us. We are going to be right back with some closing comments on Sports Econ 101. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Vern Glenn and Russell Jackman. That was a lot of fun having Bruce on, getting kind of caught up a little bit. Be exciting.
That hour goes too fast when you have Bruce and all his story.
Yeah,
that's going to be pretty cool. Let's see. We've got gosh, the Warriors are just smoking hot like the old days. I would say the old days, a few years ago.
Yeah, and Clay's due back any time now.
Yeah.
The latest we've got on that one at least at the close of business the night before we did the show is that he's been working out with the team. He's in warm-ups. He looks great. He even dunked the ball on his last shot in warm-ups before the game with the Miami Heat. And as he left the tunnel, he held up the number 6. He held up his hand like this, and people are wondering, does that signify the number of days before he returns to the team? Because if that was a factor, then he would play Sunday when the Warriors host the Cleveland Cavaliers.
So did he clarify that? That's the reason he held up 6?
Did not say. He did that as he left, as he walked out of the tunnel and left.
Very cool. All right, guys, are you ready for our thoughts for the day?
Yeah, let's go.
Here we go. All right. So my new sweater had a problem with static, so I returned it. They gave me one free of charge.
Oh, very good.
Really?
Even though we're past Christmas, we do have a Santa Claus one here. What happens when Santa's GPS stops working? He becomes a lost clause.
Oh my gosh, that's a great one. A lost clause.
All right, 2 for 2. Love that. All right, audience.
Great dad joke.
Okay, for next week, I got a little discombobulated for no sports trivia questions. I think that's the first time this has happened, like in 8 years or something. But be that as it may, we'll have to make sure we get trivia questions next week. All right, tune in next week to Sports Econ 101. We'll be discussing sports topics from a business perspective and asking more sports trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm your host, Edward Brown. We'll see you next week.
Happy New Year, America.
Oh.
Adios.